Welcome back to the 9th International Skills Forum, Reimagining Education and Skills Development for a New Normal. I hope you had a good breather and you're ready for exciting new learnings and exciting discussions ahead. We have a very interesting session next with a brilliant panel moderated by Christopher Thomas, Director of Partnership at Yidan Prize Foundation and Social Entrepreneur in Residence at Stanford University's Graduate School of Education. The Yidan Prize Foundation is a key partner of the ADB Education Sector Group in this forum. Christopher will moderate the panel on the future of education. Over to you, Christopher.
Good morning. Welcome to the ADB Skills Forum, panel on the future of education, the power of convergence. My name is Christopher Thomas, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm the Director of Partnerships for the Yidan Prize Foundation and a proud supporter of ADB's work in education. The Yidan Prize was established in 2016. Its goal is to recognize groundbreaking educational research and practice and share it with the world. To date, 16 distinguished educators have joined the Foundation's Council of Luminaries. The Luminaries have studied education through the lens of many different disciplines: neuroscience, psychology, statistics, and economics. They represent all regions of the world, and they bridge the domains of research and practice, and they have a lot to say about the future of education. I'd like to start with a short video about the Council of Luminaries.
Quality education improves lives and creates a better world. And collaboration among our best minds in education will transform our future.
Education needs more attention, more resources, and better ideas.
In 10 or 15 years, whatever we've done in schools is going to be very instrumental in shaping the future.
We know that we need to change education and that we can change education.
I'm seeing communities where there are more women in leadership positions, where we don't even need to create awareness of why women can lead.
Education is so vast. It's a complicated puzzle. Every piece in it needs to be questioned and rethought.
Rethinking the puzzle calls for our brightest and most determined minds. Researchers, educators, neuroscientists, psychologists, economists, statisticians, and innovators, working together to build a better world through education. And it calls for a space for them to spread their game-changing work across the globe.
I believe that an educated world is a better world, and it's a more peaceful world.
The majority of the world's children are growing up in the most resource-constrained countries, where school systems are often stretched beyond capacity. In an increasingly globalized and interdependent world, their education needs to be everyone's concern. So we've created a council of luminaries, experts across disciplines who'll explore big issues, share what they've learned, and influence the future of education as a team. They work in different fields, on different continents, and with different challenges, but they all see education as one of the most significant ways to change lives for the better.
Differences in human capital, educational quality, in part, drive the world economies. That, as far as I can tell, is largely the quality of the labor force in individual countries.
Not many interventions make fundamental sense. Education makes fundamental sense.
One of the biggest dangers is the great enthusiasm that comes with new ideas that isn't accompanied by an equal zeal to determine whether those ideas are actually improvements or not.
Across the board, they're keen to take a scientific approach. What works and why?
Most people are going to be bad at predicting which intervention is going to make a big difference for student achievement. And unless we have a mechanism for sorting through our ideas more quickly, it's going to be hard to make progress.
简单的一个表述就是我们的完整就是帮助每个人成为更好的自己，因为真正的完整它是身心灵的一个和谐的统一。
Next, we can adapt what we've learned to other places and populations. starting with teachers.
We know a great deal more about learning than we did 20 or 30 years ago, and much more than is put in practice in our education systems, our training of teachers.
When we go to the other countries, it's very important. We learn from that country, we learn from the culture, we learn from the people. And then also there is we would obviously endorse this ethos to be spread there, that women have to be the drivers of change.
But systems don't just have to be more effective, they also have to be equal. Many of our luminaries started their work to close a gap.
We're addressing the fact that this system as it is designed today does not work for the most marginalized kids.
It is a right, it is not a favor. Girls that are born in marginalized families do not choose to be in those contexts.
We were setting out to prove that if you took poverty out of the equation, then girls would be in school alongside boys.
The idea that you would have one part of the world where the best education is, and the another part where the thought that if we can get them through primary school would be good enough seemed inherently problematic and likely to cause greater instabilities in the world.
They're also discovering more about how we learn, right from our first days in the world.
In terms of education, what you learn early is the foundation for what you learn next. And so if you haven't had the right inputs early, then it's already starting to limit what you might be able to do next.
The early brain is born to learn, ready to learn, and there are certain conditions that when you meet them, kids can soar.
They're working out how to get others investing in change, not just nonprofits, policymakers, and governments, but also the private sector and wider communities.
You have to work with governments to impact coverage, but you need public-private partnerships and the role of civil society for two key words: quality and sustainability.
And exploring the new opportunities in a world where everything's moving online.
Our job is, make the best materials possible so that policymakers, districts say, oh, I get what can happen if we can close the digital divide. I see the social return on investment. I've always viewed it as something in ideal circumstances works hand in hand with the traditional school system and kind of helps take it to the next level.
Thinking particularly about how tomorrow's technology can improve the schools of today.
Online learning 5 to 10 years from now will be a whole quantum leap better than where we are today. It will be doing personalized learning, where learning will be personalized to everybody. Where if I'm fast, I'll be seeing one pathway through learning. And if I'm not catching on, learning will slow down for me. It'll almost be as if I have a live tutor sitting next to me.
Our luminaries see big opportunities in forming the council. They want to get to know each other's work and spot opportunities to pull together.
The synergy of practitioners and academics coming together and thinking about some of the common problems could be enormously helpful.
The Council of Luminaries believes that education builds a better world. Their innovations in research, technology, and pedagogy are shaping how education is practiced in scores of countries around the world, reaching millions of students. Together, they're seeding big ideas and exploring collaborations, and using this new network to share their own work with educators who'll put it to good use.
I hear about someone else doing something interesting. I was like, hey, sign me up. How can I help that?
That's what's exciting around the council, is this sense of the possibility of the shift in mindset, I think, that bringing this group together could achieve.
Finally, they're here to use their collective voice, to single out specific issues, and speak as one to champion change.
The fact that, you've got these visionaries and practitioners, people pushing boundaries, it's all daring individuals.
Tackling real-world problems, engaging new audiences, and speaking out for change. 3 simple goals that make the possibilities for education bigger than ever.
There is absolutely no reason to think that we can't do this. We can. Of course we can.
I am so pleased to have 4 of our Council of Luminary members here with us today. Dr. Patricia Kuhl is co-director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Science. Dr. Carol Dweck is Lewis and Virginia Eaton Professor of Psychology at Stanford University. Dr. Anant Agarwal is founder and CEO of Edx. And Dr. Mariam is the Executive Director of the BRAC Institute of Educational Development. Most of us in the audience are convinced that education has the power to improve individual lives and change societies. We've seen it with our own eyes. Many countries in Asia invested heavily in education during the last 30 years. They transformed their populations in just one generation, expanding educational opportunities at a pace that is unrivaled in human history. The benefits of this effort over 30 years are visible now. They're very clear now. Decreasing poverty, better health, faster growth, more gender equity, and vibrant civic and social spaces. Education has served Asia's social and economic development well. But there are new challenges on the horizon: climate change, jobs and technology, inequality, and building institutions that will meet the needs of our planet and the aspirations of the next generation. A strong education system will remain the first best strategy to ensure success. We'll need to harness every bit of human ingenuity and creativity to meet the challenges ahead of us. The good news, as Carl Wyman said in the video, is that we know a great deal more about education than we did 20 or 30 years ago. Advances in psychology, neuroscience, and economics are giving us new insights into how to improve learning. Technology is creating new pathways for delivering education to ever wider audiences, and better policies are taking account of the special needs of more marginalized children and youth. We now have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to reimagine education systems that will help us build more inclusive, more sustainable, and a more peaceful world. Now I'd like to turn to our distinguished panel. So I'd like to turn first to Dr. Patricia Kuhl of the University of Washington. Patricia, could you tell us?
Education is so vast. It's a complicated puzzle. Every piece in it needs to be questioned and rethought.
So I'd like to...
Education is so vast. It's a complicated puzzle. Every piece in it needs to be questioned and rethought.
So I'd like to turn first to Dr. Patricia Kuhl of the University of Washington. Patricia, could you tell us how neuroscience is changing the way we think about education, particularly in early childhood?
Hi, Chris. Yes, I'm very excited to join tonight and be able to share with you data and ideas about how the convergence of neuroscience with early education is producing interesting ideas that I think apply across the ages that we're talking about tonight. So focusing on the baby and the words here, building the mind of the child. comes from the neuroscience we've been doing, both functional and structural, that convince us that we really do build the mind of the child by interacting with young children. You see there a picture of an infant in a functional magnetoencephalography machine, and we're taking images, movies of the baby brain as the baby's learning something. We're also doing structural brain measures that give you a snapshot in time of what the structure of the brain looks like, and we can show now how experience alters the structure. The goal of neuroscience is to really understand the mechanisms underlying learning and how it is that that early experience and the structure and function that it produces makes a difference with regard to learning. So here's where the child's brain is going. This is the language network as we see it activated in an adult. You see blobs that are areas of the brain with specialization, like listening to speech or speaking or identifying words. And then you see lines that I've drawn that indicate the pathways that connect these areas. So what's interesting about this diagram is the idea that we used to think only about the blobs. The fMRI would light up areas of the brain, and we thought, oh, that's it. That's the magic of neuroscience, of how we learn and how we process information. These days, in the last 5 years, the pathways have become increasingly important. It is how the whole network works together, the areas doing their computations, but communicated to other areas by these elaborate pathways, which can only be seen through structural imaging. So my goal is to show you both examples of those. First off, we can just ask, how does experience help build these networks? Now, globally, we can link experience to the growth of connectivity in the brain. I'm showing you here general myelin measurements. The yellow is the most myelinated, red is very close to the most myelinated. And you see the differences at 7 months, 11 months, and 26 months. So we have both maturation working here and experience. And we can see this brain is getting more and more connected. These areas are talking to one another. And that's extremely important for all the things that we care about. But you can trace it down to very individual kind of connectivity. Here I'm showing you a very important piece of the language network. That pathway connects the listening areas, Wernicke's, with the speaking areas, Broca's. And we can see in randomized control trials that when you teach parents about the brain and the importance of talking to children, engaging them in interactive conversational turns, you actually grow that arcuate. You can see the difference between parents who've been coached and that we can track how much talking they're doing to the babies, how much the babies are engaging, and then how the brain is responding when compared to controls that are monitored in exactly the same way, but the parents are not given the secret sauce, the knowledge that talking to children matters, and particularly engaging them so that they respond. So these structural measures are brand new and creating a totally different look at what it means to grow the networks that allow us to do math, or allow us to do language, or allow us to do the task of reading. So here is something that neuroscience has offered us to as a understanding of what's happening early in development. In animal models, there are a lot of examples of critical periods, times in development where the environmental input makes a huge difference with regard to changes in the brain and behavioral measures of learning. In language, there is a critical period, which means that if you look at this graph and find your age at the bottom, and you're measuring the degree to which you're able to learn a second language, the age of acquisition of a new language and your language score, which is just a cartoonish representation of low to high, you can see that it's not equivalent across age. From 0 when at birth till about 7, 8 years of age, you're phenomenal at acquiring a second language, and it just requires natural exposure, not instruction, but implicit learning mechanisms are in play. But every 2 years after the age of 7, that ability to acquire the second language decreases. And everyone agrees that this curve exists. What we're all trying to do is explain it. What explains the opening and closing of these critical windows of opportunity for learning? So one of them is a sensitive period very early in development, between 6 months and 12 months, for the sounds of the language. Words of the language, sentences of the language, the grammar, that takes a little bit longer, but these windows of opportunity open at slightly different times. Between 6 months and 12 months, children are learning which are the sounds that make up the consonants and vowels that make up words in your language. And I went to 8 countries to measure this ability to hear the distinctions in your language as opposed to a foreign language. And here we see a representation of American babies and Japanese babies at 6 months and 12 months, listening to the contrast important to English, but not Japanese, ra and la, as in the words rake and lake in English. They start out equal. At 6 months, the babies in head turn conditioning tasks, meaning a behavioral task or a brain measurement, they're equally good at hearing a change from ra to la in a word or in a syllable. 2 months later, by 10 months, things have totally changed. The children listening to the native language have gotten a lot better at hearing that change. The kids in the language for whom it's not important, it's a foreign language, it isn't important to Japanese, the Japanese children are now ignoring that very same difference that they could hear 2 months earlier. So here we have in this period from about 6 to 10 months, a sort of sensitive period for the language that the child is listening to come in and alter the mechanisms of attention. And we're learning exactly how it works during that period, that they begin to focus and they sort of narrow their perception. There's a kind of perceptual narrowing phenomena. And there's a correlation between their increases in native language and their decreases in foreign language. This is a mechanism dependent on experience. We know from our experiments that during that blue shaded area from 8 to 10 months, it's highly malleable. I've shown that with 5 hours of experience between 9 and 10 and a half months of age, I can take American babies who have never listened to Mandarin Chinese and have them listen to various speakers of Mandarin Chinese, like you see pictured here. I won't show the movie, it takes too long. But what she's doing is reading from a book and playing with toys speaking only in Mandarin. The babies come in for 12 sessions for 25 minutes between 9 and 10 and a half months of age. And we look at the changes in their brain and in behavior based on 5 hours of experience. And what we show is that 5 hours brings the American babies up to the level of the Mandarin Chinese babies tested in Taiwan. So 5 hours of experience at the right time in development in this kind of social enriched experience in the laboratory, the babies come up to speed and look exactly like they've been raised in a Mandarin Chinese family. But if you show that same amount of material from a machine, there is no learning whatsoever. So we've learned something about the social need for exposure. And we are also showing that the social need extends to the hardest learning condition from a video. As long as you put 2 babies together, attempting to touch the screen to turn on the video, learning improves. We have further information from magnetoencephalography, our functional measures. When babies are in a machine listening to sounds and words through insert earphones, we produce movies that show the activity in their brains. Here, neuroscience can show us something that's invisible in behavior. When a baby hears a word or a sound in their own native language, what it does is not only activate the auditory areas, but to the right of this blob on the right, but activate the motor centers that will soon produce speech when babies are old enough to do it. We've seen that at 6 months and at 12 months in my previous studies. My graduate student, Maggie Clark, has just shown it in 2-monthers. At 2 months, if a baby listens to a word or a syllable, it activates the motor centers that will eventually be able to produce. So the activity in the brain, the need for agency is there very early in development. The National Academy of Sciences has for the first time sent out a brief that describes all of the research from Research Council studies over a 10 to 20 year period, showing that early quality childhood education makes for a huge difference, not only immediately and in early childhood, but in their lives as adults. I think it's a very important message to all countries and all nations who are making these early learning investments as a way to revolutionize education, to start early to prepare children for school, not only in language, but in math. And then finally, the convergence on the science of learning is happening. We predicted in this paper in 2009, convergence would come from the union of psychology, neuroscience, education, and machine learning. And we see it now, and we describe how this convergence has produced a description of early learning that kind of applies throughout life, that it's computational, that it happens implicitly, it just happens automatically. It's highly social, that informal context enhance learning greatly, that it's action oriented and it requires agency, that humans show lifelong learning in these ways, but especially in the early period, and that language, math, reading, all of these high content areas for school are highly malleable. What do they depend on? Opportunities to learn. Opportunities to learn is the great leveler. Opportunities to learn are not equivalent across families and nations and children's, but our studies show that all children are born with this enormous opportunity to learn, and that the malleability of their brains and of their minds allow them to create the best brains and minds that they are possible of creating. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Pat. That's fascinating. So children begin to learn from day one, and that learning actually changes us physically and affects us our whole lives. It's just an astounding finding. You mentioned psychology, and I want to turn to Dr. Carol Dweck now. Carol, the author of Mindset, could you tell us what is a growth mindset and how does it change the way we think about teaching and learning as children go through school?
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to start approaching the growth mindset by asking people to imagine a classroom where virtually all students believe they're capable of learning at a high level. They're excited to take on challenging material and they stick with it until they've figured it out and understood it, like the babies Pat was describing, where they're not afraid of struggles and mistakes, but see them as part of good learning. Also like the babies Pat was describing. This is our vision of a growth mindset classroom, a culture of deeply engaged and sustained learning, a culture that gets students ready for problem solving in the real world. In the wake of the pandemic, many students have fallen behind, many are overwhelmed, and many, at least in our country, may consider leaving school. In other words, many students may give up on themselves as learners or give up on school as a path to a better future. We cannot afford this. So we ask, can a growth mindset classroom culture, like the one I've just described, draw students back into eager and effective learning? Now, to answer Chris's question more directly, a growth mindset is the belief that intellectual abilities are not fixed, but can be developed through hard work, good learning strategies, lots of help, mentoring, and support from others. It's an idea that we developed and researched within psychology, but over time, we've become intensely focused on education. For decades now, our research has examined, For decades now, our research has examined the positive effects of students' growth mindsets on their learning outcomes. In a pretty recent study with a representative sample of about 14,000 ninth graders, 14, 15-year-olds across the US, we gave half the students a self-administered 50-minute growth mindset program. The results were exciting. At the end of the year, there was a meaningful gain in grades among the lower achievers compared to the control group. And the next year, more students across achievement levels were electing to take advanced math courses. Remarkably similar associations seem to be occurring around the world. The recent report from OECD summarizes their test and survey data from over 500,000 students in about 78 countries. First, their study showed that students' growth mindsets predicted their learning in most of their countries around the world. But not only that, it predicted their well-being in most of the countries as well. And even in some of the Asian samples, where it did not predict achievement itself, students' growth mindsets had a strong relationship with their well-being. Next, this OECD study showed that students' growth mindsets predicted an even larger boost in achievement for underserved or more vulnerable students, including students from low-income families or students who were immigrants. It was really gratifying to see this combination of overall achievement effects, well-being effects, and greater equity linked to a growth mindset in these OECD data, just as we have found in our own research. But recently, our work has turned to focus on teachers, and here's why. In our US study, something really caught our attention. That gain in grades happened when students who took our growth mindset program went back into classrooms where teachers' practices supported the students' growth mindset. These were classrooms where students could put their new or enhanced growth mindset into practice and reap its benefits. The OECD data told a teacher's story too, not just a story about students having or benefiting from a growth mindset. The data showed that teacher practices that supported students' growth mindsets played an important role around the globe. And these practices included the teachers showing an interest in all students' learning, teaching a topic until all students understood it, and providing individual help when a student had difficulty with a topic or task. These practices seem to boost the effectiveness of students' mindsets. Now, heeding the call of the pandemic, the growing inequality, the demands of the modern world, we've tried to envision the kind of education that will meet the needs of students and society. For this reason, we've now launched a new large long-term research program to study how to help teachers cultivate growth mindset practices in their classrooms, particularly teachers who currently, probably inadvertently, reinforce messages of fixed ability in their teaching practice. The program we're initiating builds on practices identified by our colleagues, Professors Mary Murphy and Stephanie Freiberg, through their intensive experience with a workshop that they developed and led, a teacher institute, which they've developed and led. These practices are intended to create the very kind of classroom culture I highlighted at the beginning. What are some of these practices? In addition to the ones I've mentioned before from the OECD study, the practices include things like teachers explaining their policies. I'm doing this because I believe in all students learning and I want to support that learning. Allowing students to advise work for credit to show, so students can show their increased understanding and get additionally rewarded for it. Teachers counting improvement in final grades. improvement over time, and final grades to reward progress. We're working on how to tailor this approach to teachers, to scale it up, to test it rigorously, and then create a worldwide collaboration between researchers and practitioners, a worldwide infrastructure, so we can develop these programs around the globe. I'll end by saying there has never been a more important time to figure out how to motivate and empower student learning. With so many students falling behind with growing inequality, and with so many modern jobs requiring advanced skills, we believe that every student has a real contribution to make to society. In this world of ours, can we afford to lose any student's contribution? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I've always thought of growth mindset as an incredibly liberating concept, but it's also, as I hear you speak, it struck me how much more interesting it makes teaching, because your goal is now shifting from delivering a curriculum to actually seeing how far you can stretch the abilities and the capabilities of every student in the classroom.
Exactly.
And, yeah, and such an important contribution to equity. If we think that the students that are perhaps the furthest behind have the most to gain from this. I'd sort of like to turn to Anant. You've spoken passionately about the importance of equity in education and opportunity in education, high quality education for all around the world. Can you tell us a bit, why is this important to you, and how is technology helping to make that goal, bringing us a bit closer to that goal?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. And Carol, I'm always, each time I hear you speak about the growth mindset, I still think to myself that there is hope for me, that I'm going to think about the growth mindset, that I'm going to keep growing, and it's just amazing. Just do it. It's remarkable.
Can you even learn a language later?
I want to share my screen here. So thank you. Thank you again, Chris. So I'm going to talk a little bit about education and reskilling, and talk about some of the inequities in education, why education is important for everybody, and how can we enable widespread quality education at scale. Let me start with showing you this picture here. So what you see here, this is not a rock concert. The person you see on the right-hand side, this is not Madonna. This is actually a classroom, believe it or not, at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. And if you think that distance education is difficult, I promise you, the people sitting in the back row in this classroom here, they are experiencing distance education in this classroom. Education equity, there's just so little education equity. Education is so important for everybody, but there's so little equity in education in the rich nations, poor nations. Even in, I grew up in India, and unless you were among the top 1%, either in terms of wealth or in terms of being able to pass exams, you did not have access to quality education. And here is just one example of a learner from India. His name is Amol Bhave. He came to Edx at the age of 15. He was growing up in India, in Jabalpur, in Madhya Pradesh in India. He was in high school at that time. And he got some incredible opportunities through online learning. And I'll tell you his story later. And he went on to MIT, and from there to Facebook. And now he's a real leader in fintech in New York. And he was a little kid who would bike 8 miles to school in his high school in the little town of Jabalpur. And I'll talk a bit about what was Amol's toolkit to success. Briefly put, it was education. To me, access to education to everybody is a human right. And the challenge for us is, how do we make it possible for everyone to have access to quality education? I'm a part of Edx, a founder and CEO of Edx, and our mission, we are founded by Harvard and MIT, and our mission is to increase access to high quality education for everyone everywhere, and also to improve the quality of teaching learning, both on campus and online. In the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you 3 reasons why I think that technology can help us meet our goal of increasing equity and quality in education. How can EdTech, how can technology enable us, how can digital technology enable us to rapidly increase access to education throughout the world? I'm going to give you 3 reasons. First, online learning or digital learning can scale. Let me show you some numbers. Edx is an online learning platform. We are a platform organization where we connect about 40 million learners from all over the world, from every single country in the world, like Amol from India, to some of the top quality education from all over the world. Our partners include, on this panel, our partners include both Stanford, University of Washington, include Harvard, MIT, Oxford, University of Cambridge, top companies like Amazon Web Services, Google, IBM, and others, 170 such institutional partners that are creating quality courses on the Edx platform. And we have 40 million learners, some of whose pictures you see here, that are taking these online courses. We also have Edx for Business, where we work with over 1,000 companies around the world, like GE and Tech Mahindra in India. We work with colleges, over 1,000 colleges and community colleges all over the world, where their learners or their employees are taking their courses completely online on Edx. Over the past 9 years that we've been in business, we've issued over 2 million certificates to people who've taken these courses. We have new credentials like micro bachelors and micro masters. You remember processors, those big honking processors and big honking education? Well, we are about micro, and I'll talk about that in a second, micro bachelors and micro masters. So we have on Edx all the way from single courses to complete master's degrees on Edx. And when you start learning on Edx, you can learn for free. You want a credential, you pay a small fee. Learning outcomes can be pretty dramatic. For learners who completed micro master's programs on Edx, within 3 months, 91% of them told us that they had a career advancement, a pay raise, a new job, or a promotion. And things like this are particularly important for our world, where upskilling and reskilling are going to be the rule of the day. When COVID hit last year, the impact of online learning and technology-enabled learning was felt in much, much bigger force than ever before. And the whole world went from in-person learning or in-person working to online learning or remote work. On Edx, for example, just to give you some numbers, in the month of April of 2020, 10 times more learners came to Edx than in the previous month of March. And in fact, in the month of April of last year, we had 5 million new learners come to Edx from all over the world, which equaled the total number of new learners who came to Edx in 2019. So all of 2019 equivalent to 1 month in April of last year. And so technology enabled us to continue teaching at scale with an order of magnitude greater impact when the whole world, when all of in-person learning simply came to a grinding halt. So technology, electrons or electromagnetic waves can travel and don't get infected. And so enabled universities and all of us to continue educating even through COVID. So technology-enabled learning can not only achieve scale, but can also enable us to teach and create access when in-person learning doesn't work. The second reason is online learning is flexible. What do I mean by that? Let's go back to Amol Bhave from Jabalpur in India. He was in high school, he was going to high school, and he discovered Edx. And he was one of the early people who came to Edx, and he took an MIT course from my colleagues and myself in circuits and electronics. This was a 15-year-old kid from Jabalpur in India. He took an online course, and this was a circuits and electronics course with differential equations. It was an MIT hard course, one of the toughest courses at MIT, and this kid aced it. It was a shocking moment for me as a professor at MIT for 30 years. This little comes in and 15 years old, gets 100 in my exam, and I said, oh my God, I got to go back to the drawing board and start doing something better with my exams. This kid aced it. And so just one example of how someone discovered online learning, did really, really well. And he did so well that I recommended him to MIT. And I said, look, we need to get kids like this. MIT admitted him into MIT. He aced MIT. And my circuits course is a required course at MIT. And Amol did not take it because he'd already taken my course online. But in those days, MIT did not allow you to take online courses and use online courses for credit. But fortunately, in his third year at MIT, we did a major experiment at MIT where we took a circuits class at MIT and half the students did it online and half the students did it completely in person. And we did an A/B test, a comparative test, working with education leaders and doing some experiments on how this worked. So Amul was really excited. He jumped into the course and, since he'd already taken the online course, he just took the final exam, and of course he aced it again, and he got credit at MIT for a fully online course. And the results of the study, not just with Amol, the results of the study were extraordinary. The people at MIT, the students at MIT who took the online version really liked the flexibility. And in fact, the stress level of the students went down one whole standard deviation. The results in a common final exam were within experimental error. And so with studies like this, we've shown that online learning can be as high quality as on-campus learning, and it's very flexible. Amol Bhave, no way, while he was a high school student, could have taken an online course from a top university elsewhere. I mean, you can transcend time and space and access because of this. The third reason, online learning, digital learning enables upskilling and lifelong learning. So imagine one of our students is Andrew from United Airlines. He is 35, he has a family, he has a family with children. No way that he's going to be able to go back to college and learn. And he realized he needed project-based learning, he needed project management. No way he could go back to university and learn, but he discovered Edx and he completed a MicroMasters from the Rochester Institute of Technology in project management. So he was able to learn on Edx even while he had a family, even while he was working. No way could he have gone to campus and earned a new credential. And so this kind of enablement of lifelong learning and reskilling is so critical to something that online learning offers all of us. During the pandemic, when we had 10 times the number of learners coming to Edx, we asked them, why were they coming to Edx? And 25% of them told us that they were coming to Edx because they wanted to reskill and upskill in their current job. As we probably all heard, that AI and robotics and machine learning are completely changing the future of work. And various studies show that over the next, we heard Carol talk about reskilling and upskilling and the need for a growth mindset to continue learning. Various studies show that half of today's jobs will be gone or be transformed within the next 5 to 10 years. And so everybody has to be learning and reskilling and upskilling, even as we are working and raising families. And here, 25% of people are reskilling and upskilling in their current jobs. During the pandemic, 11% of those who came to Edx were unemployed or furloughed. And Maggie is one example who took courses on Edx. And today, she has a job at Amazon in supply chain management. And she really credits her success in the course on lean agile methodology from the Technische University of München on Edx with a rapid advancement. We have 16% of students replacing the college schooling during this time. The other thing we're seeing that online learning can create new modalities for learning, for lifelong learning, where no way can people like Andrew do 1 year or 4 years of degrees while they're working and raising families. Instead, learners are demanding short future-proof programs like MicroMasters and MicroBachelors. The MicroMasters, for example, can be completed in about 20% of the time of a full master's degree. In critical topics for upskilling and reskilling like IoT, Internet of Things, digital marketing, soft skills like writing and digital communications and leadership. Of course, computer science, data science, and business are evergreen. Everybody wants to learn about data. And so Edx has launched Edx Online Campus, where we enable universities all over the world to sign up and have their campus students take our courses completely for free. So if you're a university anywhere in the world, you can sign up on Edx and your students can learn completely for free on Edx. We have over 1,000 universities learning. Just a few days ago, I spoke to some of our partners in the Philippines where they were learning on Edx. We've also launched Edx Online for Business, where companies are upskilling their employees using online learning. The COVID pandemic has certainly shown us how online learning can enable us to continue learning during the pandemic. And I believe that this new normal of digitally enabled learning is the future. Let's embrace it. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
In a few minutes, we have moved from early childhood through the school years into higher education. We've covered incredibly deep topical research areas and technology. And Erum, I know you are tying all of this together in one of the most challenging educational environments around. And I would like you to tell us a bit about how you combine research and practice and to produce an excellent education system.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's always so inspiring to hear from Patricia, Carol, and Anant. So what I'll tell you today is about Pashe Achi. Pashe Achi is Bengali for beside you. And we have developed this remote learning model, which is around ECD. And this has been entirely developed during COVID. So it's our experiences of the last 15, 16 months. So next slide, please. Yes, so Pashe Achi, this Pashe Achi is really focusing on psychosocial support and play. And, what we do here is it's for children 0 to 6. But for the 0 to 2, of course, we link with the caregivers. And, for 3 and above, we speak to the caregivers and to the children, like you see in the images. Now, what is Pashe Achi? Pashe Achi is a very simple phone call from a facilitator to a caregiver. It's a 20-minute phone call by an absolutely basic phone. And this phone call from the facilitator to the caregiver happens every week. Now, in this 20 minutes, 10 minutes is for the caregiver, and the rest 10 minutes is on the speaker phone so that the child and the caregiver can engage with the facilitator. Now, what does this do? It's for, everything that we heard from Patricia about, creative, cognitive development, physical, language development, social-emotional development, and it combines the healing and the learning together. And then through Pashe Achi, what it does is it's really so much about connectedness. And we've done all our research indicates that the caregivers and children absolutely love it because they feel respected and they feel heard and they feel valued. So next slide, please. Yeah, so, you might ask, how did we all bring it together? So this is a convergence by design. Now here, we did the first pivot. We had COVID hitting Bangladesh from end of March, April. So we did the first pivot around, just around that time from May. And we looked at this idea of this basic phone reaching the caregivers, across Bangladesh and, in different areas, and just see that whether this 20 minutes works. And we did the monitoring and research. We saw it's on track. Again, take it to scale a little bit, more, and then take it to new geographies. Again, do the monitoring and research. Yes, the design works. The second pivot, take it to absolutely ultra poor areas where, by the way, we still have that basic phones. 95% of Bangladeshis have this basic feature phone. And so we took it to the ultra poor areas. And then again, the monitoring and research showed that the design and operation works. So now we've combined all our learnings together, and we're really waiting to this opportunity and very, very excited about this opportunity that we will be taking this to scale from January 2022. And from the pivots of 12,000 children, we're going to take it to scale to cover about 103,200 children. So it's a big scale, but we keep on doing the monitoring, we keep on doing the research. So that's the story that I'll tell you about. So next slide, please. Yeah, so you might ask, no, the one before this, please. Yes, thank you. So you might ask that, how did we do it? And so there is this process of iteration. The first time we did it, we identified the call is so important, the facilitator to the caregiver. That call is so important. So we partnered with NYU and we developed this quality assessment tool in order to assess the quality of the call. Then first monitoring, it showed connectedness is very much possible. We went to scale and we found that, the recruitment of the facilitators, their training, all the collection of data, everything can be done virtually. And we were so excited because we were recruiting young women from communities, and they were all, taking their training on kind of Google Meet, etc. And sometimes when it wasn't possible on Google Meet, we did it individually. But the thing is that it was all possible through technology. We did the monitoring and research on the first scale, and we found that yes, we can have improvements in language, we can have improvements in socio-emotional, in gross motor, the fine motor required more attention. And then also the facilitators, the kind of training they got on empathy, that really worked. So we just heard about upskilling. These skills can really be developed. And so those were very exciting for us. When we came to the second pivot, we identified that, yes, the operation actually could be made much simpler. And what we did in the first pivot actually could be done much simpler. So we made it simpler. And, the system of care, these are COVID times. And, with COVID or without COVID, we identified that the child, the caregiver, the facilitator, and the other supervisors, everybody needs support. So we developed this system of care. For the monitoring and research of the second pivot, we identified, yes, we had, great tools for looking into socio-emotional development and looking into all the other, ECD outcomes. But for the caregiver, the mental health outcomes were so important. So we included that. And we looked at the skills of the facilitators. Again, how to go from basic to, to advanced skills. By the time we reached, this June, after the second pivot, we had pulled together all the iterations and developed a robust design. We are still tweaking, but the robust design is, is absolutely finalized. And, we are really waiting for that scaling to happen next year. So next slide, please. So here, actually, what we did is it's a very simple idea. It's about really connecting the facilitator, connecting to the caregiver and the children. And, in this, we incorporated technology. The cascading training, the MIS, looking into the monitoring, looking into the, adding new tools, developing capacities, everything, every step of the way. The interesting and the exciting thing is that, you have this very simple technology, mobile technology, where the facilitator connects with the caregiver and the child. It's on, very simple button phones. We call these feature phones, button phones. But integrated in this system is all the other aspects of technology, where we've taken, we're using software for the MIS and other platforms so that, this becomes so much more efficient. So it is really this integration of the simple with the much more comprehensive technology to make it so effective and efficient. So you might ask, what have we learned? Next slide, please. Yeah, so the first thing is that, when we do the innovation, the design really has to have an impact. I mean, the design must have an impact on caregivers and children. So this has to be done. The second is the process itself. I mean, we learn so much from the process, the insight from the implementation, all the insight from the evidences, everything has to be collected, and this again used, to refine. So the iterations are extremely important here. The third I've already talked about the, incorporating technology. I think gone are the years where we only do in person. This COVID has been such a defining moment that, we have seen that how technology makes us so much more efficient. But here we have used a very simple technology, but then again, supported by others. And then of course, this innovation has to be adaptable and scalable. I mean, scalable for impact. Our founder, he always said that, we have to have impact, and for that we need scale. And finally, in this project, the caregivers were all women. The facilitators were all women. The supervisors were all women. And, it is really about getting women as drivers of change. And, in this, women felt so empowered. They were using, they were the ones who were absolute the drivers of change. So, from the story of Bangladesh, we've looked into, very, very poor households, very, very poor families, and, empowering women, empowering caregivers, empowering children. That's what this story is about. So thank you.
Erum, thank you so much. This is an amazing story, actually, of how you've used technology to, as Pat, I've heard you say, unleash the power of parenting. And I remember, Erum, how you told me in the past how excited mothers were to get these phone calls and how the children were waiting for that phone call every week because they were all learning about how to make their lives better. So this is a wonderful story. I want to, your very systematic approach to how you're building the program too is just a lesson for all of us. I want to go back, take a second round of questions now, and I'll stay with you first, Erum. We've learned so much more about education now in the last 20 years. And we've also developed so many new tools that are helping us extend different ways of delivering education. What will it take, in your mind, to put this at scale? You're thinking about this very deeply now. And what might the world look like in 30 years if we can succeed in transforming education and putting these ideas and new tools into practice? And maybe what's at risk if we don't do that?
Thank you, Chris. I think great questions. But I think, how do we bring it all together? I think, exactly what we are doing. I mean, we need to work collaboratively. And, sort of, we learn from the global north, we learn from the global south. We really need to, work together. And, not only working together, but also nurturing these partnerships, nurturing these relationships that we are doing across the global north and global south. And I think also that, we need to see this as really one of the most important chances that we have. We cannot wait. I think time is a factor here. So I would really say that, collaboration and partnerships and nurturing that, and there's no time to wait. I mean, we are in Bangladesh, there are sort of, others, across, the north, across the south, and there's no time to wait anymore. But if we see that, if we get it right, what will happen? I think I will speak about three. The first is that, there's discoveries and all the explorations, that will continue. But we will also see the leaderships, reflecting on not only the skills, but values. We have to think of the values. And, we will find that, there's sort of the leadership wherever there is this respect, there is this compassion, there is inclusion. And also if we get it right, we will see that this social mobility, and communities really embrace this, that, education is the fundamental pathway, to be sort of good humans. And so while there will be social mobility, there will also be this recognition for education, what it does to, becoming more human, inculcating those values. And if we don't get this right, I think there will still be sort of discoveries, but then we will not have equity. We will not have inclusion. We will have exclusions. And, we will have people in leaderships becoming so self-centered and really not thinking of the other. And, we will see some social mobility, of course, but with the social mobility, we will only see what education can have in terms of income and jobs, but we will forget what it does to being human, what it does to, about respecting, about being compassionate, about really being very human to each other. So I think if we don't get it right, we will really miss out on the values of education and what it does to us as human beings. And we will be left to a very reductionist view of education. So I'll stop there, Chris. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Anant, can I turn to you for a few thoughts on this?
Sure. I'm Erum, Mariam. It is so delightful to hear you talk about so passionately about equity and access, and that is what we are all about. To your point, Chris, you talked about how much have we learned in the past 20 years. We've learned a lot. The whole MOOC movement, the MOOC movement started about 10 years ago, although online learning has been around for a long time. And many experiments have shown us that digitally enabled learning can be as high quality as in-person learning. So for example, we did an experiment with San Jose State University in California, where they used online learning in the classroom and a mix of online and in-person called blended learning. And they found that the pass rates in the traditional course that they taught increased from 59% to 91%. Traditionally, the pass rates were about 59%, and 3 semesters in a row, they increased the pass rates to 91%. And so we are seeing results like that, where we combine online and in person. And so, techniques like some of the techniques within digital learning, like active learning, where we interleave learning moments with moments where people are checking their skills. With online learning, we have a fairly regular way, a automated way of doing these things, where it makes it easy for the professor to use active learning. So techniques like this enable flexible learning for the learner, and they create some amazing outcomes. Your next part, how do we rapidly increase access? How do we rapidly scale this up to a whole planet? Frankly, the upskilling challenge is a planet scale challenge. Our whole planet needs to upskill for the future of work. And one of the things that technology does is, just see how fast the mobile phone went all over the world. The World Bank predicts that by 2025, everybody in the world will have access to the internet through mobile technology. And mobile technology, from being nowhere in around 1980, within the space of about 35, 40 years, the whole world is now using mobile phones, everybody. The question then is that, can we do the same thing with online learning, use technology to rapidly scale education around the world? I believe we can do that. And at Edx, we are doing our part. We launched Edx Online Campus. It's a way for any university, any college, any school, anywhere in the world. All you have to do is Google Edx Online Campus. You can sign up for free. We have a catalog of courses that all of your students, matriculated students, can learn completely for free, including certifications, not a penny. All your students can be learning from these online courses completely for free. And so we are working in this manner with universities all over the world, including India, Philippines, Hong Kong, China, Pakistan, and others. The key question then becomes, what kind of world can we create if we do this? I believe that in the space of 10 or 20 years, we could upskill an entire planet using short programs and courses in human skills, in things like leadership and empathy and storytelling and critical thinking. And at the same time, upskill a planet in hard skills like AI and machine learning and business and data science. All of these things can be done at massive scale. We are already educating 40 million people around the world. And then to your last part of your question, what if we don't do it? I think the opportunity cost of not doing this is just absolutely horrendous. Can you imagine a planet where half the people are not upskilled, and as the future of work completely changes things? But this pandemic has already shown how our jobs and how life is so fragile, how everything is so fragile. And during this time, online learning was the only way that people learned. So if we don't do this, I think the next disaster, whether it's the future of work or a pandemic, will wreak havoc around the world. And with global large-scale online learning, I think we have a chance to overcome some of these challenges. So my hope is that we will embrace these technologies and in many cases combine them with in-person technologies on campuses to create blended learning models that will enable us to rapidly increase access and also improve quality at the same time.
Thank you so much. Carol, can I turn to you?
Absolutely. So for me, it's become clearer and clearer that what we need to do in my field is create worldwide collaborations. This is echoing what's been said. Collaborations between researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and create a research infrastructure. We've learned, I guess, the hard way, it's extremely difficult for educators to take our ideas and practices and figure out on their own how to use them effectively. Ultimately, we knew it was our job to figure this out and scale it around the globe. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. First, with incredible encouragement and support from the Yidan Prize Foundation and the OECD, we've held one international conference on growth mindset educational practice, and we have another coming up in September. Both have brought together or are bringing together practitioners, researchers, policymakers from around the globe to present what is known, for us to learn what is known, and then to brainstorm together the next steps. Second, the Yidan Prize Foundation has commissioned 4 major state-of-the-art papers. What is known about effective teacher practice and how seeing teacher practice through a growth mindset lens can help us build coherent and motivating programs for teachers. Second paper, what do we know about cultivating behavior change across the social sciences, and particularly cultivating and motivating teacher behavior change? Third paper, what do we know about measuring the fidelity and effectiveness of newly introduced practices? Fourth paper, what kinds of research designs are best suited for evaluating the effects of a teacher intervention program? Finally, we've created a prototype of the teacher intervention program, which we're pilot testing now and will test on over 1,000 teachers next year. So for us, an international collaboration to help adapt the programs to new cultures, to test them in different cultures around the world, and of course, eventually to put them online. Student interventions, teacher programs, put them online at no cost for educators all over the world. Now, I can't even contemplate what will happen if we don't match students' education to the opportunities and the demands of the modern era. But if we do, we'll have young people who will not only cope successfully in the new world. I have Erum's optimism. We will have young people who will shape the modern era into something we are all excited to be part of.
Thank you so much. Patricia.
Well, it's very exciting to listen to others and think about these empowering ideas. I mean, knowledge is a very powerful thing. When you learn something about how effective parents can be, when you learn about the power of technology to help people create new lives for themselves, when you learn about the power of motivation and a belief in growth mindset, you can't go backwards. And I feel the same way about the human brain. When you learn that all babies around the planet are born with this huge potential to learn, and all they need are opportunities to learn, to map the brains, to wire the brains, you can't back off from that knowledge. In fact, to say that we wouldn't take advantage of it does create this stark difference in the outcomes that Chris is asking us to contemplate. On the one hand, you can imagine a world in which investments are made. These are huge investments in the early period before children get to school to help them develop the skills, the language, executive function, social emotional skills, all of the things that we know prepare children for school and for life. And if you do that all over the planet, what kind of a world would we be growing? We'd be growing a fabulous world. On the other hand, if we don't, we're creating this, we've seen it as you all mentioned, during the pandemic, the have and the have-nots, the sort of disparate differences between those who had advantages and those who didn't, who had opportunities and those who didn't. We will create an even starker reality where peoples are separated on the basis of their opportunities to learn. So I think the exciting potential is to understand how individual brains grow, that cultures are impressed on brains, that societies and the cultures, the caregivers and the children grow together. When you empower parents, their brains are changing too. Everything we've learned about babies is happening in adults as well. It just doesn't happen in 5 hours in the way, you don't learn a new language in 5 hours. Not that babies learned a new language, but they change their understanding of the sounds that matter in 5 hours. You can't do that as an adult, but babies have this, young children have this potential. But we as adults, we change all day, every day as we have new experiences. We've measured in teenagers, we've measured in adults. These structural changes are exhibited whenever we are engaged and excited and motivated by the new learning that we're doing. So we all have this potential. And what we discover about how brains learn and how they get wired will certainly help us understand and help all diverse learners in society, children with autism, children with dyslexia, children with specific language impairment. So many understandings can improve what we offer to children in the early period to help them develop to their best potential. So I think we can see this through a very rosy lens. As long as we all work together, I think everyone's been talking about the convergence that has to happen. I can see it in the neuroscience, machine learning, education, psychology, this unity that we can see in research and in publications where the advantages to collaboration are really, really obvious. That's the world we need to continue to develop. And the Yidan Foundation is playing its role, OECD, philanthropy, governments, they're all understanding that convergence and collaboration are exactly the pathway to a better world for all of us. So I think that's very exciting.
Thank you, Pat. As we're concluding this part of the seminar, I think to all of the countries that are taking part of this and how they have actually transformed their populations in one generation in the last 30 years. And I think of what a wonderful opportunity to look to the next generation, to build that world that all of you have described. It can be so much better than it is today. And we have given us so many excellent, solid pieces of research to work on, and so many excellent tools that we have potentially within our grasp a much more optimistic future. And I want to thank all of you so much for being part of this panel. It's been a joy to hear from all of you. I wish we could spend more time with each one of you. And we have a great conference ahead of us. And next we will turn to comments from our colleagues at the Asian Development Bank and join us for the Q&A session. Thank you very much. So I would like to, I'm very pleased to have with us two directors of the Human and Social Development Divisions at the ADB. Sunsuk Ra is the director of the South Asia Department, and Ms. Ayako Inagaki is director of the Southeast Asia Department. Sunsuk, I'd like to turn to you first for some comments.
Thanks, Chris, for a kind introduction. Before I starting, I'd like to thank you and Yidan Foundation and also distinguished panelists for the indeed excellent and inspiring panel. I really learned a lot through the panel. As the panel indicated, the world is changing rapidly at an unimagined speed. We are at the onset of the digital transformation, which precedes far-reaching changes not only in nature of learning and work, but also in the way we live, and also particularly during COVID-19. The challenge we are facing, I would say, huge and also daunting. However, education has not kept pace. As Professor Anant Agarwal said, it is our time for true transformation. Also, as Professor Patricia Kuhl in her growth mindset presentation said, the transformation should start from believing that students are capable of learning to a high level, and also believing that struggles and mistakes are part of learning. I think this is really excellent remarks. I really agree on that. For this, also, Chris, you said that we need to harness human creativity and also advance in technology, such as from neuroscience, psychology, digital technology. Panel also highlight the importance of collaboration among neuroscience, psychology, IT, education for enhancing learning. And also education, learning should also given from the early child education is such important. Also, learning also should design for marginalized group and also lifelong education. As a professor also, Anant Agarwal said, digital technology offers a huge opportunity for learning. First, increasing access to the high quality education for everyone, everywhere, and also making teaching and learning possible on campus and also online. Also we already witnessed it play an important role during the COVID-19 situation. But also, as a panelist already said, when digital technology, it is converged with advances in psychology, neuroscience, and other also area, that will boost the learning significantly. Now I come to two successful cases, Edx and BRAC. Edx, as we know, is one of the most successful MOOC company. And then also that already we see that during the pandemic, its enrollment increased more than 10 times. And we also already seen that the Amor's success story, that's inspiring also. BRAC example is fascinating. I would say I think the BRAC used a simple telephone technology, low tech. It's not necessarily high tech. When we talk about innovation, usually we think about high tech. However, Erum came with low tech. And then very simple, 20 minutes mobile to mobile teleconversation. Such a simple, but has huge impact. I think this is really, I would say, innovative approach. Has huge potential. Now, I'd like to come to one question to both panelists, to the Amit and also Erum. You know, the missing middle and widening inequality is an inevitable outcomes of the pandemic. With the widened disparity in access to the various modes of learning, and also between self-directed learner and also learner requiring support, the middle performer are disappearing. Not only advanced country, also more in the poor country, rapidly falling into the learning poverty trap. Today we talk about convergence. It would give you a big, perhaps, opportunity to address these challenges. I'd like to hear from the Amit and Erum, how you can really, to take advantage of the digital technology, and then what you're currently doing to address this missing middle and widened inequality. Thank you, Chris. Over to you.
Chris, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Let me turn to Ayako from the Southeast Asia Department. Over to you, Ayako.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. And echoing my colleagues, to thank Patricia, Carol, Anant, and Erum for the wonderful presentation and really insight. We talked about key concepts and approaches for reimagining education in a new normal. Some of the fundamental concepts maybe are not completely new. In the world, to me, even maybe 20, 40 years ago, there are very good initiatives happening locally. Let's, for instance, say personalized learning. Some schools are really taking initiative to support students with learning challenges. Myself, I was also one of the beneficial of such personalized learning when I spent a lot of time abroad, going back to Japan and trying to learn in 1 year what Japanese students were able to learn in 6 years. So how to divide curriculum and a learning process into small pieces and allow students like me to learn using my own pace with some, quite good monitoring from the dedicated teachers. 20 years ago, I was also in one of the countries in Southeast Asia, observing some wonderful experience in active learning. I think this is also one of the approach that Anant was mentioning. And also, as Minister Nadi mentioned on, how teachers will learn from each other's, because this is probably one of the best way to learn is really peer review and peer learning. Unfortunately, these initiative didn't survive because as typically when project ended, the whole things ended. But still, I think the spirit and the concept was there many years ago. But we didn't have no latest research in neuroscience. We didn't have convergence of science, psychology, machine learning, and education. We didn't know anything about growth mindset. We didn't have a scalable education technology expertise, and we didn't know how to put research into practice. So now, as everybody says, the world is changing at such a faster pace. The pandemic caused a huge setback. To me, my first comment is, how to have this sense of urgency to bring back education. And this is not an easy task. We talk about collaboration, partnership, but how in the ground reality, we do support policymakers, education planners to benefit from all this insight. And my one recommendation is really to focus on the most marginalized, vulnerable population and kids. In the Philippines, they call it students learning in the last mile schools in the remote area. I think this is quite urgent because we should not underestimate the speed and the time needed for students to catch up with others. It could be, 10 times, 20 times more. If we're talking about evidence-based research, some of our, panelists here could tell us how urgent it is to bring back, particularly this vulnerable population. So that's really my first recommendation. Because we have so many things to do, why don't we focus on one? And if I still have time, Chris, I have one question on putting research into practice. And I love it. I think this is exactly what we need to do. And thanks a lot, Erum, for this wonderful experience of BRAC University. In reality, in the ground, this is, again, not so easy to do. It's because, aside the experience from BRAC University, typically education are run by government counterpart, whether this is national or local government counterpart, research undertaken by universities or research institutions. The gap is probably how the capacity to deal with data. Data are with universities or data are with the administrations, whatever. But it's really the capacity of the government's counterparts to deal with data. Low data doesn't help. Data needs to be easy to understand and easy to reflect into policies, right? Similarly, from the researcher side, how much of the data or how much of the research are really adaptable to the situation of an education system where the education administrators probably will know the best and also the challenges on that. So those are a general recommendation, and it could be even one question to Erum. And I know it's a pre-recorded video that perhaps Carol who also wanted to emphasize the role of, how to put the research infrastructure in feeding into the real practices on the ground. But this is really one of the sort of maybe gaps or missing points on, and really from all of us, how to support this. So one is really urgency of learning how to put quickly as possible policies and investment program for the most marginalized and vulnerable children, as well as the workers, those who have dropped out. And the second is really a little bit more on the ground reality, how you really put research into practice from both government side as well as from the research institution side. Did I speak too long, Chris?
That's terrific. Thank you, Jaco, and thank you, Sunsup. You both have this very strong concern for equity or for addressing the needs of the marginalized children. And I think I, for one, am very optimistic after hearing the panelists that we have at least the knowledge, we have tools, and what we need to do is figure out how to get them into place and working. We have a lot of questions from the audience, and we have these two terrific questions from both of you. I'm going to start with Erum. I'm going to try to group these questions a bit. Erum, we have a series of questions around the social aspects of learning and the role of parents. One is sort of series of questions refers to Pat's idea that maybe young children don't learn so well from a screen, they learn from social interaction. And then a second series of questions is around how do we unleash the power of parenting? And how do we make parents good educators? What will it take to engage them and make them supportive of growth mindsets and supportive of their children's development? Do you want to reflect on those two issues a little bit in your work and how you think about the problem of, or the challenge of parenting and the challenge of technology?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. And really very, very exciting, very interesting questions. Well, I think from our experiences, what has happened, what we see is that, the interactions matter so much. The interactions with children matter so much. And it's the interactions and it's the relationships that, from very, very young years, from very early, just, actually we say from zero, that the fetus, from that time when the parents talk and, the child can understand that, the voices. And so the connection is done from zero. And, the relationship with the child, with the caregivers, parents is extremely important. And we have found that, parents and, caregivers, parents, those, who have really very strong relationships and those who take a lot of interest in their children, that does, that does such a lot of wonders for the child. I say relationship matters so much because, throughout our lives, actually, it matters. So similarly for the child, the interactions the child has, not only in their own, immediate families, but, in the extended families, obviously in other learning settings, in early, in our early year settings. And so all of this, the, immediate relationships, the extended relationships, these are all so good for the children. And, what you also said about, to sort of unleash the, sort of unlock the potential of parenting. I think, for parents, I think we all know that we don't learn the skills before, the child is born, but it's only when the child is born, we struggle, obviously. But I think that, for the parents, most important is to be able to understand their child. And to be able to understand the child, to be able to really form those meaningful relationships, take a lot of interest in the child, and, learn every step of the way. And so, I'll give you an example. We worked, in the most ultra poor communities where, the parents struggle for everyday food. And there, the caregivers, the mother, they were telling us a story that, I have so much hope for my child. I have so much hope for my child. And, all the time I think, what can I do better for my child? So this thing that caregivers, every caregiver always wants the best for the child. And, this, I think, so, there is no caregiver, there is no parent who doesn't want what is in the best interest of their child. And I think that, so to put it together, that, for parents to be able to really develop strong, meaningful relationships, to understand and, to be connected, to be interacting with the child, and to learn every step of the way, because already caregivers, there's so much love and so much of having the best interest of the child is just a fantastic thing.
Yeah. I think of those neural networks as algorithms, and that interaction with the parents and the social interactions that children have with other children are building the algorithms for how that child will react in terms of their emotions, in terms of their thinking.
Absolutely.
Amit, there are a lot of questions about the effectiveness of online learning. I know we're dealing with older students here. How do you measure how well students are acquiring skills, and does completion matter of a course?
Sure, Chris. So thank you for the fantastic question. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion so far. And it has left a lot of food for thought, a lot of great, intriguing questions. Coming back to your particular ask on how effective online learning is. We have something called active learning. So what we saw is when we were creating online videos, we were thinking on how do we teach online on Edx platform. We were looking at the existing system. When MOOCs were introduced, they were only plain vanilla videos, something like you see on YouTube. And in fact, even today, when we work with universities, what we see is their professors, when they talk about online learning, many of the institutes, in fact, a vast majority of them, they just record their video lectures, what they're teaching in campus, and simply put those recorded lectures in front of students. And then these are hour-long lectures. And what we have seen is they're not very effective. If a student is simply watching a piece of academic video, we have realized from our data that after 7 to 8 minutes, their attention span will start decreasing. So how do we hold on to their interest? How do we make online teaching more engaging, more effective? So we blend it with assessments. So we use active learning pedagogy, which makes you watch a video of 7 to 8 minutes. After watching the video, we make the learner engage with the content. So you take a multiple choice questionnaire, a knowledge test, a drag and drop. And then after taking the assessment, we really engage the learner into discussion forums. So just like in a classroom, if a student has any question, any doubt, most of the students don't really raise their hand in the middle of the lectures and ask their queries. They seek to peer reviews. They take their peers' help. So we have done the same thing in our discussion forums. So learner watches a video, which is bite-sized, they interact with the content, and then they discuss the learning with their peers. And when we're teaching at this scale, we really make the learner feel like they're sitting in a classroom of global audience, and they're interacting with thousands of learners at the same time. So this has made education effectiveness at least increase by 28%. So this is the data that we have. And the same practices are being used by a blended learning partner who have started integrating Edx courses into their curriculum. So that's one. Secondly, the effectiveness is also measured by how it enhances the learner's employability. India faces a challenge wherein there is a norm. So if you are good in class 10th, you will have to take science. Then you go for engineering. Then you go for your MBA, and then you lose your skill set. What we have seen is 80% of the engineering graduates in India are considered unemployable. They lack the basic skill set which the employers want them to have. So that's why we work in tandem with them. We work with the policymakers. We work with the corporates. We understand what they want to teach or what they want the learners to have, their staff to have. And then we create courses accordingly, work with the universities to inculcate that skill set and make the students, go through those hybrid learning while they're still at work. So that's my 2 cents about the effectiveness there.
That's terrific. I mean, and I think to go back to the question around equity and inequality, what I love about talking with you and with Anant is I think you have 40 million learners on Edx right now And the goal is to eventually get to 1 billion. So I'm trying to imagine that world where 1 billion people, young people, have access to education. This will be a different place altogether. And Erum, I think of your work too, and the hundreds of thousands of students you cover in Bangladesh, but also in, is it dozens of countries around the world, throughout Africa and Asia, with these fantastic programs. And these are game changers. And I see you extending the power of your work, both with a human touch and with a technology. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. I want to thank Amit and Erum and all of our speakers, and Sunsup and Ayako for their comments. You've given us so much to think about in terms of the future of education. And, you know, when we look back, we see countries across Asia have inspired others not only to dream about what's possible in education, they show them what is possible. And we know what was often referred to as the Asian miracle wasn't in fact a miracle. It was the result of investment in people, in technology, and in good policies. And so when we look forward in that same spirit, I think we can see an even brighter future for everyone, for Asia and for the world. And I think, you know, this idea of taking very seriously research into practice, as you mentioned, Ayako, is the key to where we're going to go in the future. And I want to thank all of you for a terrific session, and thank our audience for the wonderful questions that they've submitted. I wish we could get to all of them.
Chris, I just want to say one thing.
Yes.
I think in all our work, I thought that Sangsup and you know, Ayako also made such excellent points. But one thing is that we find that in all our work, what we have now understood in the last 7 years is the important role that play has for all children and for parents. And, you know, all the interaction, everything that we say, you know, this happens magically with play. So, you know, I think that, you know, this power of play is absolutely going to be, is absolutely the game changer for children and for parents. I just had to say that. Thank you.
Absolutely. That develops the affinity with learning. It develops the inquisitiveness, the curiosity, the joy, and the growth mindset, exploration. So absolutely. Thank you for that. Wow. Thank you, everyone. And we are off to the next session.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Christopher. What a brilliant session with all the panelists and also the ADB directors. As Anant, I have to remind, I guess one of the key takeaways for me is what Anant said earlier, that the new normal is a good thing. And something we've learned here definitely from this session is that the future of education really lies in adaptation, inclusivity, empowerment. We learned that all here. And as Dr. Mariam just said, the power of play, we're all learning that now, stuck, I guess, wherever we are in this pandemic. So thank you all for helping us reimagine what this new normal is. And together we can build on that, not just imagine it, but build it. So thank you again to all the panelists and the ADB directors for your comments and for the interesting questions. This definitely opened up a lot of questions also, so we need to keep this discussion going. Very enriching. Thank you very much. Now, at this point, we'd like you to take a moment, please, to respond to this quick feedback question. We just want to know, did you find the sessions on reimagining education informative and useful to encourage you to improve your work, whatever that may be? Maybe you're a student as well, your work or your studies, for whatever you are doing in the education sector. So please take a moment to answer this. You have the option to choose the number of stars there. So you'll see some stars, an option of 1 to 5, and with 5 stars meaning very much. So please take some time to answer that. We'd love to hear from you. That will also help us plan future sessions, and definitely we'll be having a lot of interesting discussions and panels not just today, but for the rest of the week.